6 months ago, I found myself in a situation that felt like a surreal nightmare. My wife, whom I loved deeply, had approached me with a proposition that seemed to defy logic: an open marriage. She spoke with an air of excitement, as if presenting me with a grand opportunity, rather than a proposal that would upend everything we had built. Her hands clasped together eagerly, her eyes shining with anticipation, and her voice took on a persuasive, almost conspiratorial tone. "It'll make us stronger," she insisted. "It'll spice things up." Her words felt distant, like they were coming from someone I no longer recognized. I remember sitting there, frozen, my mind struggling to reconcile the woman I love with the one now advocating for something so alien to our relationship. My heart pounded in my chest, a storm of emotions raging inside me: confusion, disbelief, fear. Yet, despite every instinct screaming at me to push back, I nodded, not because I believed in her vision or had any desire to explore the idea of sharing my wife, but because I was terrified of losing her. I thought that if I could be the understanding, open-minded husband, I could hold on to the love we had. I convinced myself that this was a test, a challenge that, if endured, would prove my devotion. I was wrong. Within 2 weeks, she found someone else. Not just anyone, but a man she referred to as the one, as if our entire marriage had been nothing more than a prelude to this moment. The words cut through me like a blade, stripping away any illusions I clung to. She packed her things with unnerving efficiency, filed for divorce without hesitation, and walked out of our home, without so much as a second glance. The last thing I remember from that night was the sound of the door clicking shut, leaving me alone in the hollow shell of what used to be our shared life. The weeks that followed were a blur of grief, anger, and self-destruction. I stared at the empty space in our closet, my fingers trailing over the empty hangers she had left behind, as if touching them could somehow make sense of what had happened. In a moment of blind rage, I gathered up the remnants of her presence: old notes, forgotten jewelry, the sweatshirt she had once stolen from me, and fed them to the flames, watching as the fire consumed every trace of her. I wore one of her old T-shirts to bed for weeks, a pathetic attempt to hold on to something that no longer existed. I scoured the internet for advice on how to make an ex miss you, a desperate move that only deepened my shame. But eventually the grief faded. It didn't happen all at once, nor was it some grand moment of realization. It was slow, uneven. Some days I felt normal, and others I drowned in the weight of what had been lost. But little by little, I learned how to exist without her. I rediscovered the things I had neglected: hobbies, friendships, my own sense of self. I stopped checking her social media, stopped replaying our last conversations in my head. I let go. Then, 6 months later, she returned. It was 11:43 p.m. when I heard the knock at my door. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity, or perhaps some lingering piece of my old self, got the better of me. And there she was. She looked nothing like the confident, determined woman who had left me. Her hair was a mess, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She stood there, trembling in the cold, her face etched with regret. "I made a mistake," she whispered. Her voice cracked, a stark contrast to the certainty with which she had walked away. I expected to feel triumphant, to relish the moment she realized what she had lost. Instead, I felt tired, exhausted even. The past 6 months had been a battle, a journey through pain and self-discovery. And now here she was, expecting me to open the door and let her back in, as if nothing had happened. "You can't stay here," I said, my voice firm but calm. Her face crumbled. It was clear she had expected something else: understanding, forgiveness, maybe even an invitation to come back. But I had spent too long piecing myself back together to let her unravel me again. "When you begged for an open marriage, did you really think it would work out?" I asked, my eyes searching hers for an answer. She hesitated, unable to meet my gaze. Silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken truths. That silence was more revealing than any words could have been. She had rewritten our love story, cast me aside in pursuit of something she thought would be better. And now, standing here, she had to face the consequences of her choices. Tears welled in her eyes, her lip trembling as she tried to find the words that might undo the damage. but there were no words. Not this time. You need to go, I said, stepping back. Figure out who you are, without chasing the next thrill. Maybe then you can learn how not to hurt someone who loves you. For a moment, she didn't move. She stood there, shivering in the night air, searching my face for a trace of the man who would have done anything to keep her. But that man was gone. Eventually, she turned and walked away, her silhouette fading into the darkness. I closed the door behind her, locking it, not just physically, but metaphorically, a final, decisive act of closure. Standing in the silence of my home, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel smug or satisfied. I simply felt done. It wasn't some perfect, poetic ending. There were no grand revelations or cinematic moments of healing, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe, and that was enough.